Yo, what's going on, guys? I wanted to make a video where I literally just tell you guys who I make the content for, right? I get a lot of people that reach out to me, different business models, different type of subcontractors. And so what I wanted to do was be very clear on the individuals that I actually aim to give value to, right? So who do I make content for? So kind of just starting off with like the most aerial view of it is just the residential construction subcontractor, specifically subcontractors that work directly with GCs, right? I have a lot of you guys that I know do home services like painting, window cleaning, like all that jazz, and that's more homeowners. I don't work directly with homeowners because all I ever saw was my father, my uncles, my aunt, and my uncle's business work directly with GCs. And so that's just what I understand. That's just what I know. Now, am I saying that my methods can't help you grow with business homeowners? Not at all. I definitely think they could, but however, that's going to be your own way of figuring that out because that is not who I target today. Eventually, that could be something that I do, but right now it's just strictly GCs. And again, new builds, residential construction, right? I don't do any commercial. Yes, I have commercial clients. However, I don't directly target them. They kind of just come from word of mouth. And so I deal with them and I interact with them and I have them, but I don't specifically know how to get them. And I don't really understand the commercial game as much as I do the residential game. Okay. So first of all, that's the subcontractor that I'm looking to give value to is the residential subcontractor that works directly with GCs on new builds. Now, within that subdivision, right, there are two types of subcontractors that I've interacted with recently and in the past. And I started to realize really there's really, sub A or sub B. So subcontractor A is the subcontractor that I actually don't really give as much value to because they have a different business method. What I mean by that is this is the traditional subcontractor is what I call them, right? And these are subcontractors that are business savvy. So they have business knowledge. They understand the opportunity that's in the home services and in the construction industry at large. But they have, just some trade knowledge. So for example, if they are, drywallers, they have some drywalling knowledge, but it's not specific. They're just business savvy. So they have enough business knowledge to know how to get work, right? So they're the middlemans that can find work, but they sub out that work to somebody else, to another subcontracting crew that is actually the crew that fulfills. Now, speaking of that crew that fulfills, that's the subcontractor that I call and I refer to, and I consider myself a micro sub, right? And so the micro subs are actually the subcontractor that I am looking to reach with my content and help educate so that they can grow their business along, right? The micro sub typically lacks business knowledge. They understand the trade, right? They're trade experts, so they know exactly what needs to get done. They know the ASTM codes that they need to follow. They know all their guidelines. They have solutions to GC's problems, right? They know what can work realistically on the field and what can't. They're typically owner operators, which means they'll go and they find the work and they complete the work themselves. Maybe that's one job a week, maybe two jobs a week, depending on their level, but they're typically always hands-on and then they have to go back and find work. Now, here are some traits the micro sub typically has. They typically grew up in the trade. Me, for example, I grew up in the stucco subcontracting trade. I mean, since I can remember, that's all the uncles in my family, that's all my father talked about, that's all my aunt and my uncle, because they're business owners of a stucco and siding company, talk about. And so I just grew up listening to this, right? This was the only trade that I knew. When I tried to do real estate wholesaling, when I tried to do party rentals, when I tried to do, MLM, when I tried to do all of these other consulting gigs and those failed, I always came back to this industry because I just grew up in the trade, because I just understood it, which allowed me to have specific knowledge. So specific knowledge, as I define it, are usually one or two things or areas in your life that you just understand. Right? If your dad was a dentist for 20 years and that's all you ever heard him talk about at the dinner table was, well, you understand the dynamic of the teeth and how they operate to a certain degree, right? More than I would, right? But I understand more of stucco and siding because I grew up in that, right? That's what is a specific trade. Now, most of the times it's not something we love or something we think we can even build a business around. However, that is what we just understand and what we know. And ultimately, what you know and what you understand gives you confidence and conviction, which actually gives you a leverage in business. Okay. And so that was a really quick rant on specific knowledge, but that's why I elected construction, because I just knew it and I could just sell it. And I didn't feel weird about putting a high price on a service I knew me and my father could fulfill on because of the years that we have understanding this business. Another trait is going to be that there's typically an older family member who has extensive knowledge. Again, for me, that's my father. I've connected with subs who have an uncle, who have an older sibling, who have an older cousin that just understand it. And that is also your leverage because they bring another level of expertise that's going to help you sell these projects going forward. Here are some traits that these subcontractors typically lack. I lacked at the beginning, which was business knowledge. I wanted to grow, but I just didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to find emails. I didn't know how to find GCs. I didn't know what to tell GCs. I didn't know how to connect with GCs. We're typically not familiar with any systems or processes, right? We typically know, okay, how to do the work, but we don't know how to generate that work and then how to keep that consistent or how to increase our profits. A lot of things that we don't know. If any of these traits, right, if you grew up in the trade, if you have specific knowledge in a specific trade, if you have an older family member who knows it as well, if you lack business knowledge, if you want to grow but you don't know where to start, or if you're just not familiar with any system and process that could make all of this easier, then I'm going to give you 3 things in this video that you should focus on today to be able to get you closer to developing the business that you would like to see. The top 3 focal points. Again, I want to point out that if I was to go back from day one, from scratch, in order, this is what I would focus on. Okay, now I did eventually figure this out, but I don't want you to go through 8-10 months of trying to figure this out when you can just already know exactly what to do day one so that you can start building a business that's going to have strong foundations that will eventually allow you to grow with all of the incoming volume that you're going to start generating with a consistent email outbound machine. Okay, number 1 is going to be focusing on understanding your overhead costs. Okay, you want to understand your daily rate. Okay, if it's just you, how much does it cost for you to fulfill on a project? If you're a bathroom remodeler, how many days does it take you to remodel a bathroom? Okay, and then how much is that each of those days worth? Okay. Now, if you have a team of 3 or 5 or whatever, you want to take all of those 3 or 5 teammates, their daily overhead costs, how long it takes 3 or 5 of you guys to convert a full bathroom or a kitchen, right? And then now you're starting to understand your overhead costs, but you've got to also understand your material costs right here, right? This is an area where if I could start again, I would obsess even more about, right? Right now, I can tell you to the T what it costs for our stucco crew to operate for 1 day, right? Which is $1,850, not including our admin cost. That's another additional cost that you add into it, right? And so now it actually ends up being around $2,400 to $2,500 a day for us to operate. Once I know that, and I know the time that it will take for us to fulfill on a house, you can see how this starts to get a little more accurate to understanding your net margins, right? Because at the end of the day, what your overhead cost is going to help you understand is how much you're going to make per project. That's focal point number 1. If you don't understand your overhead costs, you can stop this video, go and look at how you're going to figure this out. Focal point number 2, once you understand your overhead costs, you want to identify a base price that you're going to be able to fulfill out, right? So what a base price is, it's going to be a minimum price per square foot or linear foot or whatever you use to charge, a minimum price of that to cover your overhead and be profitable. You want to be at around 30 to 35% net profit, which is going to be considered a good starting point in my opinion. Let me explain this a little more. So what your base price is now that you understand your daily overhead costs, right? So now that you understand focal point number 1, your overhead costs. Now that you understand how long it takes you to fulfill on a typical bathroom in a typical time frame, and you're going to spend a typical amount with your overhead and your material costs for that typical job. Now that you understand that, that's going to be your base price. So let's just say that currently you're charging, I don't know, $5 a square foot, but after you do this work, you understand, man, if I want to actually make 30 to 35% net profit, I really have to be at $8 a square foot. That $8 a square foot is now your base price. Now, why is identifying your base price so important? Because that's what's going to allow you to go on and focus on focal point number 3, which is creating an email list to target. Once you know your base price, you're going to be able to test your base price with your new email list that you're going to be able to target. Now, what this is going to do is this is actually going to be the one thing where you finally start to point your business into a growth direction. Now that you understand your overhead costs, you can now identify a base price. And now that you know where your base price is, you can actually start to target email lists, because now you're going to be generating opportunities where they're going to say, okay, bid us this project, bid us that project. and you're going to be able to give them your new set of price, your new base price, where you know that you're actually going to be profitable. And what this is going to allow you to do is you're going to test that base price, but you're also going to be able to build a future pipeline of opportunities to nurture. Look, the reality of this is that when you start outbound emailing, as much as we all want it to just take off on day one, it's not going to. You can have some responses, you can have an opportunity, but that's not something that you want to expect. All right. I want to be very clear that when you start doing this emailing, the first thing and the only way that you're going to start measuring your success is if your email is seen. If your emails are getting seen, you're winning. Okay. So don't set expectations around that because it's unrealistic. And from my experience, I mean, it takes about 3 months to really get this going consistency, and then probably another 3 months to get awarded on any new project, especially if you're looking to go high custom home, right? So this is going to take time, but what you're doing in the meantime is setting your foundations really well. Now, out of the 3 focal points, which is understanding your overhead costs, identifying a base price, and then creating your email list, which is the most important? Right? I mean, it's obvious. It's going to be the one that allows you to even get down to the third one, which is understanding your overhead costs, right? This is going to be the most important because understanding it allows you to predict your net margins, okay? It gives you efficient estimates. It's going to help you identify price buckets, and it helps you convert more. Now, I'm going to explain each one of these a little more. This allows you to predict your net margins because when you understand your daily overhead costs and your material costs, and you're able to look at a project and say, that's going to take me 5 days to do, and each day is going to be, $500, for example, then you know that that's $2,500 in overhead that you're going to have in that project, right? So if they're trying to award it to you at, say, $3,000, well, you're going to deduct $2,500. You're going to say, dude, I'm going to be left over $500. That is a no-go, right? That is not going to work for me. And now that you understand your overhead price, you can go and say, okay, for this job to make sense for me, I cannot be priced at my typical $4 a square foot. I actually got to go to my new base price, which is now $8 a square foot. And that's going to be leaving me a 35% net profits, for example. Okay, it's going to allow you to predict your net margins from the get-go. And this gives you leverage because if a contractor says, hey man, it looks great and all this, but I'm not sure, it's a little bit out of my price range. Well, you know that if you're at 35% net profit, you can come down a dollar and some change, make it make sense for him while it still makes sense for you because you know where you need to be as far as your overhead costs go. Your estimates get more efficient because you estimate it once, and at the beginning, when you estimate it to submit the estimate, you already know what your end costs could be, right? And so your material takeoff, your mock takeoff is already about 60% done. You just got to include the exact pieces that you'll need, which you won't do until you get awarded, right? So this is just efficient. You're getting ahead on the job that's going to be coming when you get awarded. And understanding your overhead is also going to help you identify price buckets. Now, price buckets is something that I don't expand a lot on because I feel like it's very, you got to be at a certain level to really understand your price buckets. But to give you a quick rundown of what a price buckets are, in my definition, is knowing within 5 minutes the type of GC you're talking to, right? So if a GC calls me right now and I start talking to them, within 5 minutes, I know if they're going to be a base price, a labor-only price, a custom home price, if they're commercial. And knowing what price they're on allows me to price that job based on their characteristics and the way that I've bucketed them, right? That actually allows me to have a higher chance at winning the job. I'll give you an example. If we are low on work and I talk to a new GC that comes in and he sounds like he's typically going through a lot of subs. He sounds like he's typically, he's talking a lot about price. I'm not going to give him my custom home price bucket price, right? I'm probably going to give him my base price, which is going to give me about 25 to 30% net profits. What that allows me to do is identify whether he's still trying to be even lower than that or not. And if he is, let's just say he is still trying to be lower than that, and he's actually a labor price only type of contractor, well, then I look to my right and I say, how much work do we have, right? Are our guys going to stop for 3 days? And if that job is a 2-day job, then I would say, you know what? I'll take that labor only price. This is where we are, and make it make sense so that our guys can continue to fulfill, continue to go with their flow, and just go ahead and take advantage of this new contractor that's looking for work. Eventually, having a mixture of labor only contractors, high-end contractors, production builders, All of this is what gives you consistent work. Now, that's a little more advanced, and I'll explain that in another video, but just so you can get an idea why understanding your overhead is so important, it allows you to start to predict your growth ultimately. Now, if you're a micro sub, again, this video is just to clearly identify who I make content for. So if you're a micro sub, if you've watched and said, dang, I do kind of seem like that's me, and you want to grow, then here are 3 options for you to take from this video. Number 1 is you can learn exactly how to email, how to use a free CRM, all on my YouTube channel. I have plenty of videos that explain all that are going to help you. These are all the things that I did at the beginning and that today I've shared with a lot of new subs that are actually seeing growth with these same tactics. Now, I have not changed them at all. I left them as it is so that if that's you at the very beginning, you can find that. If you're a little more advanced and let's say you have maybe 2 or 3 contractors currently, but you want to grow more, well, then I would say, booking a 1v1 call with me would be the best. Now, this is not a free option. Okay, it is $297. But what this does is if you want to go specific onto identifying what your exact base price are, what your overhead costs are, how you're estimating, all of these different things, we can sit down and review it. And then I'll give you a straight up, like, dude, this is what I would do for the next, 30 days for you to grow to the next level. Because sometimes it's as quick as 30 days, right? To develop a habit, the habit that is then going to allow you to just massively take off, because the next things that you need to figure out would just make more sense because they come in sequential order, right? Like, you guys can't go into just emailing tomorrow because you don't even understand if your base price is right, if your overhead should be there, if what should you be considering as overhead. Like, if you don't understand those, you're going to price those. You can generate 10 new opportunities, but you're going to price those wrong, right? And you're still going to be making, say, 10 or 15% net profit, which ultimately just means you're another employee to your company, right? You need to be above 30%, in my opinion, to start generating enough profits to be able to grow, to reinvest that into your own equipment so that you can charge more. And if you're kind of on your journey, you don't know if you really need to, whatever, then you can follow me on IG. And what happens on Instagram is that weekly I like to upload videos, stories, reels of real world ongoing problems. So if I'm dealing with a certain problem, I kind of like to distill it into a reel, make it really easy and actionable, and just give feedback onto what I would do differently or what I'm going to continue to do so that our year can continue to be fruitful for us. So again, micro subs, if this is you, if you're watching this video, you are the exact subcontractor that I am looking to help give value to with my contractor. If you're more of a traditional sub, so you more of the middleman work, I'm not saying I have anything against you. You guys, everybody's free to operate the way they will. I just feel like I can give more value to a micro sub rather than a middleman sub because I've only ever worked as a micro sub, and now that's how we've been growing our business, right? That's how I know how to give GCs value as a micro sub, not as a middleman sub. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope some of you guys can identify and maybe say, okay, this is the content that I need to be consuming because he's clearly doing what I'm looking to do. I'll catch you guys on the next video.